The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a cold, sterile glow across the office. The clock on the wall ticked away each second with painful precision, marking the passage of time that seemed both too fast and unbearably slow. Kazuo sat at his desk, his fingers hovering over the keyboard, staring blankly at the screen in front of him. Rows of data blurred into meaninglessness as his mind wandered, drifting far from the confines of the corporate walls that held him prisoner. Another email notification pinged in the corner of his screen, demanding his attention. He sighed, the weight of his breath carrying the exhaustion of years spent in this relentless grind. He glanced around the office, rows of identical desks, filled with tired faces that mirrored his own. The quiet hum of computers, the rustling of papers, the occasional murmur of conversation. It all felt like background noise in a life that no longer felt like his own. He had come to Tokyo with dreams of success, like so many others. Fresh out of university, eager to prove himself, he had taken this job with a sense of pride and purpose. But that was years ago, and the excitement had long since faded, replaced by a gnawing emptiness that he couldn't ignore. The long hours, the endless deadlines, the constant pressure to perform. It was all too much. He felt like a cog in a machine, his individuality stripped away in favor of efficiency and productivity. Kazuo's thoughts drifted to a different life, one that felt almost like a dream now. He remembered the summers he had spent in his grandparents' village as a child, the freedom of running through open fields, the warmth of the sun on his face, the simplicity of life there. The memory brought a pang of longing that cut through the fog of his daily existence. What if he could go back? What if he could leave this all behind and return to a place where life made sense, where he wasn't just another faceless worker in a sea of thousands? But that was just a fantasy, wasn't it? How could he afford to leave his job, to move to a village with no guarantees, no safety net? The thought of it terrified him as much as it thrilled him. He had responsibilities, rent to pay, savings to build, a career to maintain. Yet, the more he thought about it, the more the idea took root in his mind. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way out. Kazuo's mind buzzed with the possibilities as he left the office late that night, the city streets cold and unwelcoming. The crowds of people, all moving with purpose, felt like a tide that pushed him along, further from where he wanted to be. He had never felt more alone in a city of millions. As he walked home, the buildings towering above him like silent sentinels, he made a decision. He couldn't keep living like this. The next day, he started researching. He spent hours online, looking up small towns and villages in the Japanese countryside, places where life moved at a slower pace. He learned about farming communities, artisanal crafts, and the growing movement of people who were leaving the cities behind to start anew in rural areas. The more he read, the more he felt a spark of hope, a possibility that maybe he could do this. But it wasn't just about finding a place to go. He knew he needed to change his mindset, to shift the way he thought about his life and his future. He started small, making adjustments to his routine, cutting out unnecessary expenses, saving more diligently. He began to visualize the life he wanted, picturing himself in a small house with a garden, surrounded by nature, far from the noise and chaos of the city. He also reached out to old friends who had made similar moves, gathering advice and learning from their experiences. They told him it wouldn't be easy, there would be challenges, sacrifices, and moments of doubt. But they also spoke of the rewards, a sense of peace, fulfillment, and a connection to something greater than the daily grind. Weeks passed, and Kazuo's determination grew. He started selling off possessions he no longer needed, minimizing his life in preparation for the move. His co-workers noticed the change in him. He was more focused, more driven, yet there was a calmness about him that hadn't been there before. He didn't talk about his plans, keeping them close to his chest, but he knew that soon he would be ready to take the leap. One evening, after another long day at the office, Kazuo sat in his small apartment, the city lights twinkling outside his window. He held the resignation letter in his hands, the words carefully chosen to convey his decision without revealing too much. His heart raced as he thought about what it meant, leaving behind the security of a steady job, the familiarity of the city, the expectations of those around him. But it also meant freedom, the chance to build the life he had been dreaming of. The next morning, he walked into his manager's office and handed in the letter. The manager looked at him with surprise, then concern, asking if he was sure, if he needed more time to think about it. But Kazuo shook his head. He had thought about this for months, and he knew it was the right choice. With his resignation accepted, Kazuo felt a strange mixture of fear and exhilaration. There was no turning back now. He spent the next few weeks wrapping up his work, saying goodbye to colleagues, and finalizing his plans. He found a small house in a village nestled in the mountains, a place where he could breathe, where he could finally start living the life he wanted. The day he left Tokyo, the city was shrouded in mist, the tall buildings fading into the gray sky. Kazuo looked out the window of the train as it sped through the countryside, watching as the urban sprawl gave way to rolling hills, forests, and open fields. The tension in his shoulders slowly eased as he left the city behind, replaced by a sense of anticipation and calm. When he arrived in the village, the air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of pine and earth. The mountains loomed in the distance, their peaks dusted with snow, and the village itself was small and quiet, a stark contrast to the noise and chaos of Tokyo. Kazuo took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the city lift from his shoulders. The house was modest but charming, with a small garden out front and a view of the mountains from the back. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Kazuo set to work immediately, unpacking his few belongings and making the place his own. He spent his days exploring the village, meeting the locals, and learning about the community. He quickly found that life in the village was different in ways he hadn't fully anticipated. There was a sense of connection, of people looking out for each other, that was absent in the anonymity of the city. Neighbors dropped by to introduce themselves, bringing gifts of fresh vegetables, homemade sweets, and advice on gardening and village life. Kazuo felt a deep sense of belonging that he had never felt in Tokyo. He wasn't just another face in the crowd here. He was part of something larger, something meaningful. He took up gardening, growing his own vegetables in the small plot behind his house. It was hard work, but it was satisfying in a way that his corporate job had never been. As the weeks turned into months, Kazuo found himself adjusting to the rhythms of rural life. He woke up early with the sun, spent his days working in the garden, helping out in the village, and learning new skills. He discovered a passion for woodworking, spending hours in his small workshop crafting furniture and tools. The income from his savings and the few pieces he sold at the local market was modest, but it was enough. He learned to live simply, appreciating the small pleasures of life, the taste of fresh produce, the warmth of the sun on his skin, the quiet of the night. He no longer felt the need to chase after success or wealth. He had found something far more valuable. Kazuo also found himself reflecting on his past life with a new perspective. The years he had spent in Tokyo weren't wasted, but they had taught him important lessons about what he truly wanted in life. He realized that he had been chasing someone else's dream, living a life that didn't align with his values or desires. The shift in his mindset had allowed him to break free from that cycle, to redefine success on his own terms. As the seasons changed, so did Kazuo. He became more confident, more at peace with himself and his choices. He no longer felt the need to prove himself to anyone, to his former colleagues, to his family, or even to himself. He had found contentment in the simplicity of his new life, in the connections he had made, and in the work he did with his hands. Winter came, and with it, a deep sense of quiet and reflection. The village was blanketed in snow, the mountains standing silent and majestic in the distance. Kazuo spent his days by the fire, working on his woodworking projects, and his evenings reading or listening to the wind howling outside. He found solace in the stillness, in the knowledge that he had made the right choice. One evening, as he sat by the fire, a knock came at the door. It was one of his neighbors, an elderly man named Takashi, who had become a friend and mentor to Kazuo. Takashi had lived in the village all his life, and he was full of stories and wisdom about life in the mountains. "Kazuo," Takashi said with a smile, his breath visible in the cold air, "I brought you something." "It's a gift," Takashi said, "for all the help you've given me this year. You've become a part of this village, Kazuo. We're glad to have you here." Kazuo felt a lump in his throat as he accepted the gift. It wasn't just a token of gratitude, it was a symbol of his new life, of the connections he had made, and of the community that had welcomed him with open arms. "Thank you, Takashi," Kazuo said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm grateful to be here. This place, it's become my home." Takashi nodded, a knowing smile on his face. "It's a good life, isn't it? Simple but good." Kazuo couldn't agree more. The life he had created here, the shift in his mindset and situation, had brought him a sense of fulfillment he had never known in the city. He had found his place, his purpose, and his peace. As the snow continued to fall outside, Kazuo sat by the fire, holding the wooden crane in his hands. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, the fears and doubts he had overcome, and the new life he had built. It hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. And as the fire crackled and the wind howled, Kazuo felt a deep sense of contentment wash over him. He had found his freedom, his peace, and his place in the world. And he knew, without a doubt, that this was where he was meant to be.